We're on the air.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, always talking up the game that we love. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel for the very best in college football coverage. And, of course, the audio versions you can find on Google Play, Stitcher, Podbean, and iTunes. And a special, extraordinary special treat tonight with my longtime friend, Brent Carlstrom, who has no media outlet. It's a shame because when I talk draft, when I think draft at any point during the season, the calendar year, I think my buddy Brent, who joined me for the first time as we were just at the beginning of our friendship back in 1995 for the NFL draft, Brent.
Wow. We're getting old, Mark. I say that every time, but we're getting older every time.
Your wife told me recently that I was timeless, so I'm going to take her point of view on this one.
You know, when I'm like 90, if you're still looking like you are, I'm going to know something's going on.
There's a Twilight Zone that delves into such matters.
Indeed, one of my kids' favorite episodes.
But we digress. I don't have a long history of hundreds of decades of past.
Yeah, that's what you say anyway. We're all wondering.
That's what I say. I don't know if I can get away with that. And I've got to battle the cough as well. So you need to do most of the talking because you've got most of the knowledge and information here. So we're talking strictly Green Bay Packers, and we will have the live chat working. So if I come across some interesting comments and questions, I'm going to hit you up. But basically, I know that you're going to deliver a lot of good stuff here on Draft Eve. The first of which, Brent, is that we've got an organization here that is considered very well established and well founded, but at the same time, it's a bit of a different organization than what we had at the end of the 2017 season.
This is not your father's Oldsmobile, Mark. I think that what we experienced after the end of the Super Bowl and in the beginning of the offseason was sort of the night of the long knives, if you will, in Green Bay. There weren't many people who were spared the axe. Ironically, I think that the fact that the head coach made the cut may have surprised more people than anything. But if you look back on what happened after the Super Bowl and really even the playoffs in general, I think the stage was set for a change. Here's what I mean by that, Mark. Our staff is, kind of pats himself back for their ability to develop quarterbacks, right? And so our star, Aaron Rodgers, goes down to a clavicle injury, and we put in our protege, and things fall apart. Meanwhile, what's happening in the rest of the NFL? The NFC Championship game features two teams that have backup quarterbacks playing because of injuries. The Super Bowl is won by a team with a quarterback who's a backup because of an injury, right? The thing we laud ourselves for, other teams exceeded us in. And so I think there was accountability that a day of reckoning because of that fact. I think the way the NFC Championship, the Super Bowl played out really led into the night of the long knives, the changes that happened in Green Bay following, that part of the season. And if you look at the top three things, a lot of things have changed. I think the top three things are obviously, number one, our GM was replaced. Thompson replaced by Brian Gutekunst, only because they want to make it difficult for the rest of us to pronounce our GM's name.
Possibly related to the former Minnesota Golden Gophers head
Dom
coach,
Capers
John
replaced
Gruden.
for Mike Pettine. Anyway, that brings up my next point real quick. I want to interject. I may have all the knowledge, but you have all the names down. So if any time in here I have difficulty with a name, I'm going to ask you to help me. And if I get it wrong, you can buzz me, okay?
I will buzz in, sure.
And then our offensive coordinator, Edgar Bennett, was replaced by a sort of a refurbished Joe Philbin.
Number 34, Edgar Bennett.
Say again?
Number 34, Edgar Bennett.
34. Super Bowl champion himself, actually. If you look at these, this is my top three list of the things that changed in Green Bay. With the defensive coordinator hiring of Pettine, it's funny. I read a quote where during the interview, he was asked, do you run a 3-4 or a 4-3 defense? His answer was, yes. Okay. I think that got him the job. Uh, you think of our new offensive coordinator, Joe Philbin, flashback to the year 2011, you could argue that Aaron Rodgers had the best season of any quarterback in the history of the NFL in 2011. 122 plus quarterback rating that year, right? That was the year Joe Philbin, it was his last year as the offensive coordinator of Green Bay. So I think that brings great hope to us because, you know, things have kind of struggled recently, even offensively. The thing you wouldn't think would happen in Green Bay has happened.
Was that the 15-1 season?
That was the 15-1 season, correct. The should-be Super Bowl season. I'm going to call it the, should-be asterisk Super Bowl season. And then finally, the new GM, Brian Gutekunst, right? I imagine if I was a fly on the wall during that interview and they asked Brian, who was in our he was in our hierarchy already, he was an internal hire. If they asked him, what is your vision? What do you think we need to do going forward? My guess is that he answered that question this way. We have arguably the greatest quarterback of all time for the next 6 years. Let's do everything we can to make this next 6 years count. The future be darned. Which is a twist or a turnaround from our previous GM. And I don't want to cast any dispersions on Ted Thompson. He won us a Super Bowl. He made a very difficult decision in the transition from one quarterback to the next. I laud the things he did, but he was known as a very conservative guy, right? And my hunch is the new guy realizes the clock is ticking, and he's willing to probably move beyond that paradigm, if you will. So that's sort of a little synopsis of what I call the night of the long knives in Green Bay.
All right. So the Packers obviously have a draft strategy, unlike the Cleveland Browns in particular, but like most teams, they do have a draft strategy. In looking through the year-to-year success rate of any NFL team, it's staggering to me that the success rate is not higher for these NFL teams based on the resources and the money and the attention and the detail that's placed into this. So it is typically, if you can get something in the range of 3 to 4 somewhat impact players that are going to benefit you and really fill out your roster in any particular time, you've probably had a successful draft.
You take that and run. At 3 or 4, you take that and run. Yes.
Yeah. So keeping that in mind, the Packers, in looking at the roster and then kind of segueing that with what you know about the personnel and the strengths of the draft, what is your thought about what this overview looks like for the Packers entering tomorrow night?
Well, if you've watched a Packers game over the last 6 years, I think one thing stands out to you. It's the fact that they can't stop the other team from passing the ball. And that's probably a little bit because our head coach is an old school, Pittsburgh, old school football kind of a guy. He's a stop the run first kind of a guy, right? But in this day and age, and catch this, I'm about to use a 5-syllable word, okay? That's kind of an anachronism. That's like old school thinking. Today, you really need to stop the pass first. Don't you think, Mark?
Yeah, it's a pass-happy league. Throws about, 60 to 65% of the time.
And our pass defense has been so bad, we even made Deshaun Kaiser look so good that we traded for him. That's how bad our pass defense is, okay? So do we need a wide receiver? Sure. We lost Jordy Nelson, right? Do we have questions on the offensive line? Sure. We have a gaping hole at right guard, maybe even right tackle. But we have to solve the problem of stopping the other team passing on us first and foremost. And I honestly think that this new guy, the new sheriff, Gutekunst, has a hold on that fact, right? So the question is, though, is he going to break away from some of the Ted Thompson paradigms? I don't know if you are familiar with some of these Ted Thompson isms, but let me share them with you if I could, right? All right. From the Ted Thompson School of Drafting, first of all, Never draft a cornerback shorter than 5'10" and 7/8. Okay, this is actually legit, right? Never draft a player with a 3-cone time test of greater than 7 seconds. Okay. Draft only blindside protectors from college. Do you know that in 12 years, Mark, this is staggering. In 12 years worth of drafts under Ted Thompson, okay, of all the offensive linemen he ever drafted, he only drafted 2 offensive linemen who were not blindside protectors in college. Okay? That's another paradigm. Next paradigm, trade back and accumulate picks rather than trade up at the cost of picks. Next, use pre-draft visits. You know, every team is allowed 30 pre-draft visits with college players. Use pre-draft visits to look at late round picks and undrafted free agent possibilities. And finally, probably the most famous Ted Thompsonism is make no forays into free agent signings the first week of free agency. Don't make any big bucks signings, right? So the question is, will the new guy, Brian Gutekunst, will he adhere to this catechism, if you will, or will he go off to a new direction? And I think he will. He's given us some hints that he will. For example, he has used many of his pre-draft visits to host potential first and second round draft picks. In fact, some of those were cornerbacks shorter than 5 foot 10 inch and 10 and 7/8 inch tall. Free agency. He signed 2 players early in free agency to top dollar contracts and even tried to do 2 other contracts early in free agency. So there is an indication that maybe the new guy is going to take a new approach to seize Rogers' last 6 years. All right? Does that make sense at all?
Well, your explanation of his process makes sense. I would say about 2/3 of his actual process makes sense. The other third I would question. Yeah. I would need hard facts to back up the legitimacy of point number 1 in scouting cornerbacks based solely on that specific height designation.
You know, it's funny because there's a lot of pretty good cornerbacks in the NFL who are 5'10" or less. And it's funny, the one guy that Green Bay lost, Sam Shields, a couple years ago to concussions, he was 5'10". He was our best corner. So I think that there's an actual skill level to the corner position that a shorter guy has an ability to maneuver and move laterally and turn his hips that maybe a 6'1" guy doesn't have.
And you just have such a quantity of these guys on the field today as opposed to 30 years ago that you can't be that picky. You just need serviceable players at some point. Your 4th defensive back on the field, your 4th corner on the field can't be near the quality of somebody else's number 2 cornerback in a traditional 4-3 defense 30 years ago.
Right. Exactly right. So that begs the question, how is Thursday going to unfold? And really, you know, I mean, you and I have been talking a long time about draft. It's not just the first round. It's the second, third, fourth. It's all the way through this thing, right? So Green Bay holds more picks than any other team currently. We have 12 picks in the draft. Part of that is sort of an offshoot of Ted Thompson's I'm not going to sign any free agents methodology, because when we lose a free agent and don't sign a free agent, we get a compensatory pick. And so we're dealing with several compensatory picks for players that have gone on and become all pros at other teams. I'm not even going to go into there, okay? So what are we going to do with that? And what I'd like to do for you this evening, Mark, is not go through a 12-pick mock draft, but instead I want to look at how can we handle this draft to pinpoint our need to stop the pass. off air, you and I were talking about the fact that every team drafts for need. If you look at the fact that the need is they need really good players, right? So if you want to stop the pass, the areas that I look at specifically are, number one, a pass rusher, number two, a cornerback, and number three, probably something that's not considered as closely, is a linebacker who can cover running backs, tight ends, and slot receivers. Because if you watch an NFL game, the old adage was protect the boundaries. Well, the new NFL, everything's over the middle. And that's where Green Bay gets eaten up game after game, is over the middle. So a middle linebacker who can cover somebody in the middle of the field is almost more important, if you will, than a corner or an edge rusher. So I want to take a look at our draft from the standpoint of finding those three people: a corner, an edge rusher, and a middle linebacker who can cover. Okay? So I'm going to present to you three different scenarios. Now, I posed the question whether this new GM, Mr. Gutenkunst, would be a different GM than our previous one, who, as I said, his paradigm was move down in the draft to accumulate picks, not up in the draft. I kind of have a hunch that
unfortunately, it looks like we've lost Brent. He froze up, so I've prepped him on exactly what he needs to do when this happens. So he should be clicking out, coming back in to the conversation very quickly. I appreciate everybody jumping on board. I know this is a bit of an aberration talking NFL draft from the NFL side of things. So I've released a lot of NFL draft videos over the past couple of weeks. So hopefully you guys have cashed in on those. But you also know that I love the NFL and love to hear this perspective as well. So I think Brent's back with us.
Yes.
There he is.
Okay, so I don't know where I dropped off, but I want to suggest to you that our new GM is actually going to be aggressive in this draft. He's shown himself as aggressive in the postseason already, and I think you're going to see the Packers move up rather than down in this draft. So I'm going to suggest to you that there are a handful of players who, if we hang out at our pick at number 14, are most likely to be gone by pick 14. And I think that we will be willing to ship our third-round pick to move up to maybe slot 10, Oakland. We have some – oh, look at this. My son just brought me another prop here. I can't fit into that anymore. I have a big head. We all know that. Where was I? I was talking about the fact that we're going to move up with Oakland, maybe, is my suggestion, because we have a connection with Oakland. Their GM is a previous VP of personnel at Green Bay, Reggie McKenzie. So if we trade our third-round pick to move up to slot 10, and then later in the draft we have 2 fourth-round picks and 3 fifth-round picks, we package that up and move back into the third round. I'm going to suggest to you 3 scenarios for a first, second, and third-round pick that will address this need we have to stop the pass. Okay? Do you have any questions so far, Mark?
So, Brent, I don't personally have many questions, but we've got a number of people on here that have questions and comments for you. So, carry on.
All right. Well, I'm going to give you your best case scenario. And I say that because it features a guy from a little small school in Columbus, Ohio. All right?
Hey.
Ohio State University.
Sounds like you might be going with Mr. Hubbard.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Hubbard's going to go late first, maybe into the second.
Okay.
I'm thinking of a guy named Denzel Ward.
Oh, we're talking cornerback. I thought we were talking pass rush.
Well, I'm talking to nail the 3. I'm talking to try to nail a pass rusher, a corner, and a middle linebacker who can cover. Okay?
Ohio State can churn out some defensive backs, and he is the next great one.
Okay? And this year, Denzel Ward, to get a hold of him, we would probably have to move up into the top 10. And so if we let's say we move up to number 10, we take Denzel Ward. And as you know, he ran a 4.3 at the combine. Speed is something we lack. He comes in below that 5'10" and 7/8 inch measurement.
Uh-oh.
Who cares? Let's throw that out the window now. And then in the second round, a USC pass rusher named, you're going to have to help me on this, Uchenna Nwosu.
Very close.
All right. Now, you look at his measurables from the combine, he didn't measure off the charts. But if you look at his production, particularly for an outside linebacker, he had double-digit pass breakups. This is a guy who plays with heart and soul, plays hard on every down. So some prognosticators have him going third round. I'm going to pick him in the middle of the second round. All right. And then third round, I'm going to go with who was sort of the darling of the NFL Combine. He's a linebacker from Central Florida, Shaquem Griffin.
There you go.
He's the guy with only one hand, right?
Absolutely.
Put up 20 reps on the barbell there.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Amazing guy. But the thing that I like about him is obviously because of his situation, he plays with a chip on his shoulder, and he plays hard on every down. But he also ran extremely fast 40 time, and we could use some speed to cover the middle of the field. So that's my scenario number one, and that's my best case scenario. Denzel Ward, my corner, Uchenna Nwosu.
You're right on it.
As my edge rusher, and Shaquem Griffin as my middle linebacker. All right. Now, an alternative universe, all right, would feature, and I don't think we can get this guy at number 10,
okay,
but I'm going to reach for him anyway. He's the middle linebacker from Georgia. You probably saw him play pretty well in the NCAA championship game. Roquan Smith. All right. This guy can cover lights out, and that's what I need in my middle of my field. You follow him up in the second round by another SEC player, Dante Jackson.
Okay.
He's a corner from LSU.
Sure.
He comes in a little small in stature. He's probably going to be a nickelback, but the cat ran a 4.3 40. And we've had him in as one of our new sheriff in town pre-draft visits as well.
How tall is he? That's the important thing.
He is 5'10" and a half. So he comes in like, a smidge below the Ted Thompson tape measure. And then finally in this scenario, to get my edge rusher, I'm going to go to Oklahoma. And I'm going to get a guy who you're really going to have to help me with. Agonia Akanorokwokwo.
Oh, yeah.
Agonia.
Okoronkwo.
Whatever.
It's been a long time since I've seen his name, but I know exactly who you're talking about. I like him. Yes. Really good football player.
Interesting thing about him, he tested well at the combine. He has stats off the chart, but because he comes in at 6'1", teams say, "Oh, he can't be an edge rusher in the NFL." You know what? It worked out pretty well for Elvis Doomerville, don't you think?
Teams just didn't want to try to pronounce that name.
Maybe that's the problem. They don't want to have to write that on the card. So that's scenario number 2. Roquan Smith, Dante Jackson, from Oklahoma. All right. My third scenario to get my trifecta of a corner, a middle linebacker who can cover, and an edge rusher is this cat from Virginia Tech, Tremaine Edmonds. Okay. I'm in love with this guy, right? And here's why. First of all, early in the Packers last season, we had a linebacker named Anthony Barr who put a hit on our quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, and broke his collarbone, right? This guy, Anthony Barr, is sort of a jackknife, Swiss Army knife sort of a linebacker. There's no pigeonhole he fits into. He does it all. And I want one of those. I'd like one of those guys. And in this draft, Tremaine Edmunds is probably the closest to that player. And the other thing I like about him is that he's 19 years old right now. Today, as we speak, he's 19 years old. That means he can only get better. That means when he hits his third contract with us, he's still in his 20s. And those are some positives. And so that's my quarterback chaser. Now my corner in the second round would be a guy named Mike Hughes. He's out of Central Florida also. If you got a theme going here of Central Florida, I like their players a lot. Again, he falls under the Ted Thompson tape measure. But, boy, he's a feisty little guy. He may not be as fast as Denzel Ward. He might not be as fast as Dante Jackson, but he's a feisty little guy, and I like that. And then in the third round, what might be considered a reach for a lot of people, I'm in love with a guy from Clemson, a middle linebacker named Dorian O'Daniel. All right? I see him all over the board. I see some teams that say or some prognosticators who say he's a second-round pick. And then I see other guys say he's a sixth-round pick. I'll take him in the third and be happy about it, even if he has to spend the first year playing special teams. But he is one of those modern NFL middle linebackers who's a little undersized, the 210, 220, 6'1", more like a safety hybrid. But that guy can cover the tight ends, cover the running backs, and cover the slot receivers. And that's what I'm looking for to solve this primary issue that I see in my Green Bay Packers keeping us from the next Super Bowl.
All right, Brent, if you're up for it, we can carve through some comments and questions right here.
Would love it.
From 19 Savage. So 19 Savage is always on me to produce as much Texas video content as I possibly can get to. So 19 Savage, rest assured, I've taken some Texas notes from the spring, and I'm going to segue that with some other stuff that I have, and you hold tight. But in the meantime, 19 Savage letting us know that he's very interested in the Packers. Okay, Big Papi JT. He's a Packers guy as well. Let me see if I can find. So while you were lamenting the issues with the pass defense, they were both pointing out that they didn't think that that was just a secondary issue, that was a pass rush issue. Then, of course, you later addressed the pass rush and the need of a pass rusher. 19 Savage also making the comment that you need a wide receiver. Other people chiming in that you got to be careful with this wide receiver class. There are no really elite wide receivers.
Hello.
So, Brent, you may have missed some of those comments. I don't know at what point.
I missed all of them.
Okay. So, basically, we've got a Texas fan that also loves the Packers. I won't go through that saga again. Excuse me. So, while reviewing and while you were lamenting the lack of a pass defense, a couple people chimed in to let us know that that wasn't just a secondary issue. That was an issue with a pass rusher. Of course, you addressed that later. Need a wide receiver. That was mentioned a couple times, but also not necessarily a great draft for wide receivers.
The wide receiver position is kind of an interesting one in this draft. The top guy is a guy out of Alabama, Calvin Ridley, right? On most boards. But here's a guy who's I think he's 25 years old, and he did not show a lot of production because of Alabama's system. And because of their quarterback, they had the majority of their season. So that tells you a lot about the quality of this receiver draft. So as it pertains to Green Bay specifically, Mark, I would say we are looking for a guy who can take the top off of the defense, if you will, who can stretch the defense. All right. Our number one guy, Dante Adams, is a possession sort of a physical guy. We need a receiver who can be the long ball guy, can take the defense long, right? And there's a receiver out of LSU, DJ Chark, who probably is the most capable at doing that. And although his numbers aren't all that good, you have to realize his quarterback that he had to him was a guy that even Purdue didn't think was good enough to be their quarterback. Danny Epling, is that his name, I believe?
We're talking about the Purdue quarterback? I think Brent locked up on us again, unfortunately. I think he was asking me about the Purdue quarterback situation. Of course, Danny Etling, we would be going back a few years, and then he transferred to LSU, and that must be what Brent is getting to, the LSU transfer, Danny Etling, and him not being able to set up DJ Chark for big plays. 19 Savage, I will ask about James Washington. That was on the tip of my tongue as well when he talked about a wide receiver taking the top off a defense. So, Brent, are you back with us?
Yeah, you know what? Next year, a different room in the house.
Hey,
so
we're here.
So look, Danny Epling was his quarterback. I don't know if you heard that part, right?
Absolutely.
DJ Chark.
I follow LSU.
And Purdue didn't even think he was good enough to be their quarterback.
Yep.
So what does that tell you to DJ Chark had to him? I would love to have DJ Chark. However, I think you have to go second or third round for him, and my priority is stopping the pass. Now, hang on real quick. There are a handful of guys who can get you 20 yards a game in college who can maybe translate that to the NFL, and the guy I like later, maybe fourth round, fifth round, is the receiver out of Central Florida, Traquan Smith, right? Problems with drops, maybe not as big as Chark, but he averaged 20 yards a catch. And there's one scout I read said, you know what? You guys should be talking about this Smith guy a little bit more.
So I know they went undefeated. I know they beat Auburn in the Peach Bowl, but you understand this Central Florida program is about a one-year wonder.
I agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. My guy, 19 Savage, the Texas fan, named someone that I was thinking of when you mentioned taking the top off of a defense, and that's James Washington from Oklahoma State.
It's interesting. James Washington is another guy. You see him all over the board. No one can come to a consensus on James Washington. I've seen him from the first round to literally the fifth round. And what's the reasoning for that? I can only imagine it's because of perhaps root tree, perhaps simplicity of offense. But you're right. Here's another guy who averaged 20 yards a catch in college, and he might not be the tallest guy out there, but boy, is he productive. Now, if we could slip him into the third round, yeah, maybe he's a value pick at that point. But I do agree with your fans out there who are saying we do need a wide receiver.
Big Papi JT says you haven't had a pass rush since Clay Matthews has kind of moved past his prime. Brent, unfortunately, locking up again on us, talking Packers NFL draft with my buddy Brent Carlstrom. So we appreciate you jumping on board for a bit of an aberration here and looking at the NFL side of the NFL draft as we get ready for the big night on Thursday night with the first round and the ensuing rounds throughout the weekend.
This is horrible. Brent. This is horrible, Mark.
No, that's okay, Brent. So I don't remember what you were talking about.
I was talking about James Washington and the fact that, he would be a great third round pick if he slipped that far. I'm not going to take him any earlier than that because I don't know how progressed he is as a route runner.
Do you know much about Harold Landry? He was a menace at Boston College, not necessarily this final season, but really from the time he stepped on campus was one of the best pass rushers in college football.
Here's what I know about Harold Landry. I know, first of all, he may be a Green Bay Packer as of tomorrow night because we need an edge rusher, and he, as you intimated, was an animal, especially 2 years ago. What did he have? 16-plus sacks 2 years ago. And this year, hampered by an ankle injury, not so much production. But there are some scouts who feel he's a little soft. Now, I've heard that down through the years about players that a scout doesn't like. And when I hear the assessment that he's soft, I think a little bit that perhaps the scout's a little lazy. So Harold Landry, if I were to do a fourth scenario, as I presented my three scenarios, he may be my pass rusher in a fourth scenario. I'd be okay with that pick.
So Timothy brings up an interesting point about James Washington, and this is something that I have to find myself doing each and every draft season, detaching myself from the performance on the collegiate level from the potential performance and the projected performance at the NFL level. James Washington considered a burner in college, but once the measurements came out, he was more of kind of an average speed guy, not an elite speed guy, and that may be one of the things that has knocked him down.
Well, it's interesting too, though. If you look at the burner is as much of an issue as separation is an issue, and there are two ways to gain separation in the NFL: A, with pure speed; B, through whatever else you throw at them, and that's moves, that's jukes, that's second moves. But there are slower guys. I mean, Jordy Nelson ran a 4.55 40 at the combine, and yet he got plenty of separation on guys. So if you have the skill to bust a move, you can get that same separation. And to me, separation is the thing that's the issue.
So all this wide receiver talk has started the wide receiver cascade of comments. DJ Chark from LSU, as you mentioned, Big Papi JT jumping on that train as well. Antonio Callaway is a bit of a troubled soul at Florida, but one of the most collegiate-ready guys to step on campus there at Florida, according to their coaching staff when he got there, and made huge game-changing plays when he had any semblance of quarterback play at Florida.
And that's a good thing. That's a good point, too, because I want a guy who, when the lights are on, is going to make a play, right? There's a guy from Colorado, Michael Gallup. Have I lost you?
Colorado State. So we have people commenting about Equanimous St. Brown from Notre Dame. I think you're back with us, Brent.
I am. I might transport myself to another room as we speak. That would be a first, probably, at Mark Rogers TV.
No, it would not be. It's been done many times by we've done just about everything on here. We've had cats and dogs on the show. We've had people walking through their yards. People.
The point I wanted to make was about Callaway. You had mentioned when the lights came on, he was
Antonio Callaway. Big catches for Florida.
And that's the guy I want. I want the guy who, when the lights come on, he makes the plays. There's a guy from Colorado, Michael Gallup, who
Colorado State.
Thank you. Great season there, but in some of the postseason things, the Senior Bowl and the Combine, he struggled a little bit because he's isolated with the lights on him, and that worries me a little bit. I want a guy who, the stage is not too big for him.
Other wide receivers. Mentioned here, Equanimous St. Brown from Notre Dame, Jamon Moore from Mizzou, Callaway again, a lot of other guys. The Washington wide receiver.
St. Brown is a popular name, but I think St. Brown, I don't know, maybe it's because it's a knock on Notre Dame's passing game. He will probably slip to the end of the draft, and if you get him there, I do think you get a steal because he not only has size, but he has speed too. So he has not realized his potential, I think, being at Notre Dame.
All right. So fortunately for me, you named 9 players in your 3 scenarios, of which I'm familiar with all these guys. One of our viewers was very happy that you mentioned Mike Hughes and actually listed him before. You mentioned Mike Hughes being maybe a bit of an undervalued guy that you really like, possibly in a 3rd scenario for the Packers.
Right. Again, I just love his essence, his sort of aura out in the field, kind of just a feisty guy who overcomes maybe some athletic limitations, maybe some size limitations, and he just sticks it to you out there.
All right, Brent, the NFL draft is never the same without you. Unfortunately, we won't be able to spend the draft together or have much interaction during the NFL draft, but this is the guy that I think of when I think NFL draft, and this is a guy that, speaking to myself, who thinks football almost all the time, but I still think NFL draft, Brent Carlstrom, that's the automatic connection right there.
I might not have Mel Kiper's hair, but I've got his knowledge base.
And you're a little bit you know, you give us a little bit more on camera as well. You never know. Mel's going to shoot it straight each and every time. You kind of dive off into these.
You know the new Mel will. You know the old Mel though would get a little sparky. You know.
Yes. He's become
when he got that big contract. I want to introduce my son Boaz here. He's sporting the Aaron Rodgers jersey.
Very nice.
He's dyed in the wool Packers fan.
It looks good.
So
Boaz looks good on you.
Hello.
Okay.
All right, Brent. We will catch you soon. We appreciate it. This was a aberration for Mark Rogers TV, but we definitely enjoyed it.
All righty, buddy. It's good seeing you and good doing this anytime you want. All right.